So if you look at this map, um, there's a road here. By the way, after we get done walking here, we have just 2 stops and you're done for the day, okay? At Port Republic. There's not a lot of places to stop here. So anyways, Jackson's Way is on the other side. Now the North River is over here. The South River is over here. The two of them come together on a peninsula right here, and that's when it becomes the Shenandoah River, okay? Or at least the South Fork.
South Fork, yeah.
Yeah. So anyways, what happens is early in the morning, Jackson comes out on the doorsteps of a house that the building is there. It's not the original house that was here during the Civil War, but if you go to the end of the road and bear to the right, Madison Hall is a big house that sits up in the field kind of on your left. And there's no place to park up there. That's why we're here, okay? So Jackson would get up in the morning there, and he gets out on the porch. You know, he's got some of his other staff members. There's a church. Actually, the church is right there. And back in 1862, it wasn't a big, beautiful brick church. It was kind of a wooden church. Okay. So Jackson gets up in the morning. It's a Sunday morning. Where do you think he wants to go?
Got a church service.
Sure. But it's like 8 o'clock, 8:50, you know, it's in that early time frame. And while he's standing there, he hears an artillery piece open up, and it hits the church steeple, and some of those shingles come tumbling down.
Yeah.
And so he says, something is up. Now, the church is being used to store men that have been wounded, so it's a hospital. And his physician, Hunter McGuire, have you heard of Hunter McGuire?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so Hunter McGuire is out front trying to get men loaded into wagons to take them up the Stanton Road to Stanton, right? So he's there, and you know, you hear the artillery shell, and Jackson says, something's up. So he asks for his orderly to go get, his orderly's name is Tom, by the way. He is a enslaved person, and is with him throughout the, you know, as long as Jackson lives. So he tries to go get the horse. He hears another artillery shell burst. He says, maybe I'll just take any horse I can find. Well, before he can actually get another horse, Tom comes up with his, and Jackson and some of his staff members that are staying at Madison Hall start to run down the road in this direction, heading down here.
This street right here.
This street right here, which is Main Street, that's Water Street. So as Jackson starts to move down here, Union cavalrymen under the command of a man by the name of Carroll, okay, Colonel Carroll, is actually starting to move 150 cavalrymen across the South River over here. And they're starting to move over and into the streets. 2 artillery pieces come. One of them sets up just about right here, and the other one sets up down at the old bridge, which you can still see the abutments down here. And in the meantime, Jackson starts riding. Now he gets over to the church here, and he hears Hunter McGuire using some language that he doesn't approve of, especially on a Sunday morning. So he pulls in to speak with Hunter McGuire. Union cavalrymen are coming into town, all right? But he stops and says, it's Sunday. Couldn't you maybe use some milder language? And Hunter says, okay. I mean, what's he going to do, right? I mean, they're friends. They sleep under the same roof typically. So anyways, he leaves Hunter, and as he starts riding, continuing down this way to see what's going on, Union cavalrymen that are crossing on the middle ford, which is here. There's a lower, middle, and upper ford. And you've got cavalrymen coming in here. And the artillery is starting to set up. As a matter of fact, one of the artillery pieces, by the time Jackson gets to this side of the covered bridge down here, is actually starting to set up. Now, one story says that Jackson was wearing his military uniform that he had always worn when he was at VMI. I can prove that that's not the case, okay? So probably the story that they have about him stopping at the artillery piece and trying to encourage them to bring the cannon across the river probably never happened, okay? Because he was definitely wearing a gray uniform at the time. But anyways, Jackson will come here, he'll go screaming to the bridge, cross the bridge just as the town becomes occupied by 150. Now, supposedly, if you read Crick, about 50 of them will stay kind of on this end of the town, but the big prize is up here around the corner. And that's all of the supply wagons that Jackson has are there. And by the way, Jackson's army is across the river, across the covered bridge over here. So if you look, the Confederate encampment is here.
Yeah.
Jackson is here. There's about 24 men that are up here. There's a guy named Captain Moore, and he actually comes across not with 14 on your map, but actually 24 men, plus himself. And he starts to hear what's going on, and he sees that there's Union cavalry coming into the area. So Moore brings his men from the upper, he's up there guarding the upper ford. He'll move in this direction up to Madison Hall, because it doesn't take much to realize that probably the reason that Carroll has attacked here is because he thinks that maybe they're not so much after the army or the bridge, maybe they're after his supply wagons. And actually, Carroll had had some information that had come in that he actually knew that the supply wagons were pretty much unguarded. And that's why he had decided to attack. Now, Carroll, when he was getting orders from his commander, the commander would say, he'd get a message saying, get to Port Republic, burn the bridge. A few hours later, get to Port Republic, don't burn the bridge. Then he'd get an order saying, burn it, and don't burn it. Not that many times, but anyways, he had conflicting information. The last orders he got was, capture the bridge and hold it. And that would keep Jackson's army over there, so he could, he would have to deal with, with Fremont or whatever. But cutting him off there and capturing his supply train. So anyways, this guy, Sam Moore, will move out with his men. We'll put him up here at the end of the road, along a stone wall and a fence. And in the meantime, the 100 cavalrymen that are here, artillery in place, they're ordered to charge. And they're actually going to charge right through the fields to our right, right up towards Madison Hall. And all there are 24 men there to receive them. And the cavalrymen, all 100 of them, roughly 100, charging up through there. 24 men open up with them one shot. They receive the shot. They say that some of the saddles are empty. By the way, as they're moving through town, Hunter McGuire is here. Crutchfield is their artillery master. He's here. They're both captured. When they make the attack, guess who's riding with them? Hunter McGuire. So in the cavalry attack, you actually have two Confederate officers who've been captured who are now part of a Union cavalry attack towards Madison Hall.
They may have been actually leading the charge.
They actually, if you read what McGuire says, they were in front.
Because there's a way to get away.
Yes.
They just kept writing, right?
They kept going, and they do get away. So anyways, you've got a combined command attacking Madison Hall up here, right? So on they go. They're repulsed. The cavalrymen come back here and they're kind of reorder. There's a battery up there that has realized what's going on, and they've started to retreat along with the wagon train. They're figuring, we got to get out of here. Well, somebody convinced them maybe they shouldn't. There's a man, a Colonel Carrington, it's on your map. He's able to get one of those artillery guns, and before the second charge, he gets one of the guns in place. Now, interesting thing about this battery, they've never been in battle. Most of them have never fired a shot. But here they are, a second cavalry charge, 24 men and one artillery piece. So they load up one of the artillery, that only artillery piece they have, and they say, my God, what do we put in? Do we put in canister? Do we put in? All we have is solid shot.
Oh my.
So they put one solid shot in the artillery.
Yeah.
And then they say, my God, we got to aim it. And they can't aim it. Well, at least they're not quite experienced enough to realize what you have to do to actually elevate and lower a cannon. So what they do is they say, well, they're coming at us, the second charge, just fire. So the artillery piece fires way over the heads of the cavalrymen that are coming towards them.
No.
Another volley comes from the infantry, and they say, my God, where did all that come from? And they retreat. Now what do? They're a little bit embarrassed. Actually, they're looking down the road and they're saying, some activity down there too, and that artillery piece down there has started to fire. It actually only fires a couple of times, but it fires. So they say, charge again. They make a third charge up here and they're repulsed. By the time of the third charge, actually 2 artillery pieces have shown up, and Carrington has convinced them to fire some shots and, to defend it. And what happens is they begin to realize, those 100 Union cavalrymen, that maybe this isn't a good place to be. Because Jackson goes across the bridge and he says, we got to find somebody to come back and re-secure the town. So he actually doesn't get to the Stonewall Brigade. He gets to the 37th Virginia, not one of his original Stonewall Brigade regiments, and convinces them, yes, there may be an artillery piece at the mouth of the covered bridge, but I want you to attack it anyway. So they'll come charging out of there, cavalry here, and they will actually rout, the cavalry on their own kind of rout themselves out of town. I can't tell you how close Jackson came to being captured, but if he actually rode by that Union artillery piece that was at the end of the bridge down there, had to be pretty close. Now, if he'd been wearing that blue uniform, maybe he could have gotten away, but it's pretty certain that he changed that actually before the Battle of McDowell into a white. So, anyways, he gets over, he sends men back, and everybody is driven out of town. And that happens early in the morning. But all that action is right here, and then down at the bridge. So any questions of what's going on here? And Jim, jump in.
Well, I was going to say at the bridge, that artillery piece is aimed right down that covered bridge. And they know they're going to get one shot and they got to get out of town. So that he fired, but at the last minute, instead of firing straight down, he decides to angle the shot more to the side to maybe disable the bridge as well as the 37th Virginia. So when he fires, what could have been a traumatic, terrible massacre, actually not too many people get injured because they fired off to the side.
Exactly.
Which allows them to continue. If you can imagine, I hate to be so gruesome, but you've got packed men in a covered bridge and you fire canister down through there. They're not going to gather and start up again very quickly. So what happens is when they, these guys get a reprieve, they realize what could have happened in the 37th. They don't waste any time. Give them credit for getting out there on the bridge to begin with. Tremendous amount of courage and a willingness to sacrifice. But as soon as that cannon went off, they kind of all looked around and everybody was still standing. They came at the run. At that time, there was only one Union artilleryman there. He yanked it and took off.
That's it's on your map actually. If you look, there's a. If you look down where by the way, this is the modern bridge we came across up here, and this is the other one. There's a sergeant there. Everybody, when they saw that there was reinforcements coming across the bridge, all of the artillerymen except for Sergeant Gilday decided, let's get out of town. They left the artillery piece there, fired that one shot, and he thought he could weaken the structure of the bridge, like he had said. What they didn't know was this was one of the first bridges, and the only one actually on the Shenandoah River, where they had used iron supports on the bridge. So weakening the structure and making it collapse wasn't going to happen. But they didn't know that. So Gilday takes that one shot, and you know what he does? He gets across that lower ford as quickly as he can and leaves his piece. Now the piece that's here, they tried taking it across the river, but remember the river itself is flooded from all the rain. And so they actually get it across the river, and as they get up to the upper bank on the other side, they get hung up in some bushes, and they're forced to abandon that gun because the 37th Virginia has come across the bridge. They're not in a good mood, and they're heading up to try to push them out of town as well. So they're getting infantry fire, and they leave the artillery piece, and they'll head back downriver, down to a place called Lewistown. It's actually a big plantation down that way. And that's actually, when we leave here, we're going to take Jackson's Way, which is on the evening after the fight that takes at Cross Keys and here. They're going to cross the river here. Now the problem is they've got a bridge here they can use, and when they get everyone across, they'll burn the bridge. But here they have a problem. There is no bridge across South River. And so what do? They take wagons, they put them in the river, and they take planks and put them over the wagons. And that's how they're going to get their army across the river. The problem with that is you have a choke point. And that is you can't get everyone over at once. So it's one company, one regiment, one brigade, artillery, all of that has to go over very slowly. It takes basically all night to get the army across the river so that they can fight the next day at Port Republic, just down the way. But are there any questions about this? And let me ask you too, I don't know how you are for time. I'd like to take you guys down to where the other bridge is so you get an idea of where that is. Would you mind walking down there?
That's good.
Okay, that's good.
One question.
Yes.
You said Carol received information, wagons were here, his supplies. Was that like maybe a spy, or was that somebody did recon of the area?
They had recon, and the reason being,
they didn't know Jackson was here. That would have been a.
That was a bonus.
That would have been a bonus, so they would have got him.
Yeah, if they captured him, it would have been a bonus. What they did know was where the train was, you know, the supply train. They knew that. They knew about the bridge because all the other bridges on this fork had been burned leading up to this battle. So the only way to get across the river was there.
You can almost think of it as a recon in force, because they're still trying to determine exactly where the Jackson was. Well, if they hadn't run into him here, they probably would have gone down the bridge and then seen them camped across the river. That's where the army was. Jackson's forces. They just kind of, again, this was just fortuitous. They came in and said, oh my gosh, you know, and they knew something about the supply train. They go try and capture that. But it's a rout. Once they charge 3 times and they're hearing firing at the other end, these guys are getting out of Dodge. They're running. And by the way, Carroll was an infantry officer, not a cavalry officer. He was a brigade commander who was out part of this cavalry reconnaissance group. So he was out trying to figure out where he's going to take his troops. He's going to be the lead Union brigade coming into Port Republic in the fight.
Here's a test for you because I can't remember the name. They say that when Carroll came into town, there's rumors he had been drinking seriously. There are a lot of rumors about Carroll not being sick the morning that he got here, and that it was actually another officer, a captain, that took over command here. And I can't remember his name, but I do remember he was a company commander with Custer, that little bighorn.
Miles? Keogh?
Keogh, that's the name I couldn't remember.
Oh, okay.
So they say that Keogh probably took over command from, you know, because of, from Sprig Carroll.
Which side was Carroll coming from? Was he coming from Fremont's side, or was he
he's
coming
part of
across
Shields'
the
vanguard.
Yes,
He's
Shields'
army.
army is coming up on that side of the Massanutten, and Fremont is on this side.
So he was able to ford the river that they couldn't take infantry over.
That's right.
I mean, even though they were cavalry, they could make it through the water that was run through. But
That's
Exactly.
oh, okay.
And even though they did have trouble getting the cannons across, somehow they were able to do it and keep their powder dry. I don't know how they did that.
Yeah.
And these were fords.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
they'd be a little easier, but still, your point's taken. With all that water, the men couldn't get through, the horses could. So you kind of guess about how high it was.
Yeah.
You know, 3 feet, 4 feet.
That's true. And James Shields is the commander. He doesn't get here.
Yeah.
Right.
There's a man named Erastus Tyler that actually is command here. James Shield is an interesting guy. He's the only guy that ever had a duel with a future president.
Yeah, well, they were going to. Did they
Yeah.
actually duel? I think they finally got talked out of it.
Shields had challenged Abraham Lincoln back in Illinois to a duel. And they actually went to Blood Island one morning. And
Oh, yeah, I remember hearing this.
yeah, Abe got to choose weapons, so he chose the broadsword. Abe was 8 inches taller than Shields, and Shields had actually taught fencing. And so Shields looked at him and said, because supposedly Lincoln went up and kind of trimmed a branch off a tree, and Shields said, "We can work this out." So if you don't mind, if there are any other questions, I'd like to walk us down there. Be very careful that Confederates hold the town today.
I saw that.
So, okay, and I think that's a good thing.